All right, so on our continuing adventures through old TV, we're still in the 50s, of course. I guess we'll be in the 50s for forever. So this is our first game show, so that's a little different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, I guess you're lucky, I should say. So, yeah, it was your birthday this week, and there was a birthday miracle. That there's a show. I was going back to make sure I didn't miss anything from the 40s, and a couple little things came up. And one of them was a show called Your Television Babysitter, which, from what I could find, is just that. It's just a lady reading stories and stuff, and it's for kids. If I could have found an episode, I just think that would have been funny. So we'd be sitting there watching. We'd be watching that right now. But lucky for you, Birthday Miracle, that doesn't exist anymore. You can't.
Okay.
You can't
I think I'm kind of glad.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be terrible. So instead, this is Truth or Consequences.
Oh, yes, Truth or Consequences. I remember that name. I've never watched those shows, and
Right.
I'm not a game show person. But Truth or Consequences was a very, very famous show.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds from what I read, it sounds like it might be kind of entertaining.
But I wouldn't have thought of it as a 50s show. I would have thought of it more 60s, early 70s. Why don't
Yeah.
you check your little
Well, it
systems?
is, 'cause
How
it's,
long did it run?
All times. Yeah, it's like an insane, like, super popular show. So it started on radio in 1940. This guy, Ralph Edwards, is the host, and it's based on this childhood parlor game he used to play called Forfeits, where I guess you got to answer a question, and if you can't, you got to do something funny when you forfeit. So, because I'm always interested too, like, where do game shows even come from? Like, what is the origin? And for this, it was this game he played as a kid. So it was the first game show to ever air on TV for just one day in 1941. There's this station in New York. On the first day the station existed, they played this show
the
once.
only station that did exist.
Yeah, and it just wasn't popular enough
And
because
it's
TV.
1941.
But that was again only one time.
Yeah,
But TV, like we've been saying each week, it just wasn't enough of a thing. People didn't have enough, so it just wasn't.
I'm surprised that anybody had a TV in 1941.
Right. Well, then it came back in 1950, literally just because TV was more popular now. They're like, all right, let's try that again. And it had been popular on the radio for that 10 years. So they're like, all right, let's bring it back. And yeah, it ran with various breaks and different hosts from 1950 to 1988.
Okay. All right. So that's why I know it.
Yeah. So it just never, I mean, it did stop, but not for long. It would always come back. And then they almost brought it back again in 2012, but it didn't quite work. So it hasn't quite come back again. And different hosts and stuff, but the most famous one, I didn't even know he was involved in this, is Bob Barker of The Price is Right.
Yes. Okay.
So he's the most famous host of this show because he did it from 1956 to 1975. So that's a pretty serious run. And I think he only stopped because he was doing Price is Right. So this episode is from April 1956 with a guy named Jack Bailey hosting. It's the only one I could find online. But
1956, we're moving right up there. We're
it's
into the 50s by this time.
Yeah, well, again, it's like we're kind of jumping around a bit because this is on my list of shows from 1950 because it started in 1950, but the only episode I could find, the earliest episode is 1956. So that 6 years, the first 6 years, who knows? That original host, none of his episodes are around. So
Okay, well, I haven't got a clue what it's about or how to play it or anything. I can't say I ever watched it, but I do know the name of that show.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing with this podcast right now. We'll find out. And the one other little thing I just thought was interesting is there's this wrestler, Mick Foley, who was always one of my favorite wrestlers, and he was always billed as hailing from Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Even though he's from Long Island, he just thought it was a cool sounding place to be from because it's like Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, but it's a real place. He's like, that's weird. Just say I'm from there. And but
it is a real place?
Yeah, but he never knew why it was called that. No one really looked it up or no one cared. They just thought it was a cool name. But it turns out it's because they did a cross-promotional stunt in the 40s to cross-promote with the radio show. They're like, hey, we'll change our name. What was the place called? Something Springs. I didn't write that down. But they're like, hey, if we change our name to Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, then you can do the radio show from here and it'll promote tourism and blah, blah, blah. And it went so well that they kept having like annual meetups of Truth or Consequences fans, and this place just never changed the name back. It's still called that to this day.
Well, Trivia.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it is a cool name for a town. It's pretty cool because there's those occasional like wrestler hometowns. Like the big one is The Undertaker is from parts unknown, you know. But as far as an actual place, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico is pretty cool.
But there's not really a place called Parts Unknown.
No, right.
No.
So Truth or Consequences is a real place, but just barely. It's just, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like, isn't there a place called, like, Enterprise, Wyoming or some shit where they do Star Trek? There's all this stupid crap,
But that's a reasonable name, Enterprise.
Yeah.
But Truth or Consequences?
Or I thought maybe, at the very least, I assumed maybe it was, like, some Old West town. Because, you know, that's a real, like, don't step out of line or you're in big trouble name.
You'll face the consequences.
But it turns out it's actually a very stupid name.
Don't draw your guns or you'll face the consequences.
Yeah, but it turns out it's actually just named after a stupid game show. Like it could be, like fucking Jeopardy, Wyoming, you know? Although I guess Jeopardy is also a creepy name anyway. So yeah, let's check out this. So I'd say, I think that was a pretty entertaining show. It's just that of the half an hour,
look at these. Look how these are going up. Like Ralph Edwards production. There we go.
But like without even exaggerating, of that 30 minutes, how much do you think was the show? Like 4 minutes? 5 minutes?
Well, they had the 2 episodes on, so probably 10. Each of them was probably...
I don't even know if it made that.
Maybe not 10. No, maybe not. Because those women kicking the things.
But definitely. So let's say 10 though, just to be generous.
Let's say each of them 5 and 5.
So a third of the show was the show. And so I guess I'll say real quick. So what happened is the episode I had from 1956, the sound wasn't working. So we hopped on YouTube, and it was kind of for the best because I found one from later that year, but it was the debut of Bob Barker, which is probably more historically significant that we saw that one, you know, because it's like he was the guy. He's the main host of that show that everyone knows. Plus, he's Bob Barker. Like, we still know who he is. He's the famous guy. So that was kind of cool to see Bob Barker's debut. So they said it used to be an evening show. This is where it became a daytime show. And yeah, you can feel that dailiness. Like, okay, I'm trying to remember where it was. It was like the first 12 minutes was the originator of the show introducing Bob Barker and then talking about how great NBC is and some other NBC stuff. And then they cut to some commercials for like a Sir Lancelot show and some whatever other stuff. It was literally the 17-minute mark before Truth or Consequences actually started. And it's like, we were just sitting here watching it like, I wonder if Truth or Consequences is entertaining because we still don't even know what it is. Like, that is so slow. Unbelievable. But then it turns out it actually was. It's a funny idea.
But it could be that it was just because they were introducing a new man to it.
Yeah, maybe.
And it is the first time it was the daytime show, and they were just trying to kind of bring people up to speed as to introducing the show. Now, what you'd have to do is watch a subsequent show.
Yeah, I'm sure by the 60s and the 70s, they had to have sped it up. They could never get away with that pace. No. That was so slow. But I kind of get the sense that maybe why it was so slow is that it was pretty elaborate. So how it works is they ask a question that you're not intended to be able to answer. And it was kind of funny where you're on a really short timer anyway. And Bob Barker was like distracting people so they couldn't answer. But it's a weird riddle that doesn't have a proper answer anyway. There's no way you could ever answer these things. So then you've got to go do, it's like truth or dare, I guess is what we would call it now, is since you didn't get the question, you got to go do the thing. And the things that they had people do were pretty elaborate. So maybe that's why they eat up so much time with nonsense. Because
really, the first one, that wasn't all that complicated. I mean, they set up kind of a goalpost thing, and you had to kick the hat over the little board. That really wasn't.
Well, I guess
it was just the gag that was involved. It was.
Yeah, like I don't think it was complicated from a production standpoint, because it was just they. Had 4 hats and 4 women, and they said that they had put a giant rock under one of the hats, and everybody had to take their shoes off and kick the hats, and then the loser breaks their toe. But then the joke was there was no rock under any of the hats. It's just that the last person was very nervous that she was going to hurt her foot, which is a real weird gag anyway. It's more that the idea, I think, would be hard to come up with. Like if they've already been doing it, like the guy said, for 17 years between radio and TV, and now they're going daily. Like if I had to come up with one of those right now, it'd be a little tough, I think. So to come up with them every single day.
You can see why people, though, would have been drawn to that show.
Yeah.
Despite how long this one was, because that was ridiculous how long it was before anything got started. But once it did get started,
Yeah, it was pretty
you're
funny.
kind of saying, gee, like, okay, they're asking the guy about fishing, and you're thinking, yeah, okay, and they're leading him up to a fishing thing, and then they open up the big pool, and he's got to catch that fish, and you're thinking, yeah, okay. But there's always a trick to it, and he's got to get in with his little
Yeah, so
little
the second
tiny
one, yeah, was like
sieve or
they put a bunch of tiny fish, not a bunch, like 5 or 6 fish in
little goldfish.
in a wading pool, and he had to catch one specific fish that they had marked with a strainer thing. And again, it's like the joke is that you can't do it. Like they asked him a question that had no logical answer, and then if he could catch this fish, he'd win $1,000. But again, no, of
He's
course
only
you
got a
can't.
minute to do it, and he's
Yeah.
in a pool that is 12 feet wide.
Yeah, he's splashing around all wet. But then the consolation prize is he wins a year's worth of groceries and he gets to come back and win some more shit the next time. So it's like, it's a good setup. I like it. It's like kind of like a fun show of like, just come on this show, be embarrassed, but we'll give you some stuff. Yeah, it's just that the signal to noise ratio is ludicrous. Like I still can't believe literally 17 minutes until the show started.
Anyway, it was interesting.
Yeah, I assume if we jumped ahead to future episodes, like there's probably way more. You know, they probably do 6 of those in an episode instead of 2 type of thing. But yeah, I don't know. So that's weird. It's like an up and down of like I can see why it was popular, and it is kind of a good idea. It's a funny show. It's kind of cool to watch. It's just like let's not only let's pick up the pace, let's quadruple the pace because this is so slow. Like wow.
Yeah, I don't. If just based on that one though, although the last part of it was kind of funny, I can't see myself, even if I had lived in those times. Well, no, that's not right. I'm saying I would not go back and watch that show again today. But if it was 1956, 57, and TV is still fairly new and people are just sort of a lot of people are getting it in their houses and there's very limited stuff that you can watch on TV, yeah, I guess I would watch it again.
What if though? Yeah, and here's what I'm thinking. Maybe you wouldn't tune into that, but what if you're like, oh, my show I want to watch is on in 15 minutes. Oh, perfect. I'll watch the end of Truth or Consequences when they actually do something. You know, then it'd be perfect. Like if you catch half of the show, you'd be all set.
But obviously, if it lasted as long as it did into the 80s, it was extremely popular and must have had a whole lot of viewing.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think the gap between the 70s and the 80s was about 10 years, but it was straight through to the 70s and then a little break and then it finally fizzled out. But, and just interesting that it is the first one. I mean, that's the first game show on TV. And it's like, yeah, it could be a lot worse if it was just a little faster. It was neat, too, to see Bob Barker. Because, yeah, I've never seen him without white hair, ever. And it's like, oh, yeah, there he is. He looks the same. He sounds the same.
And the voice is exactly the same.
Yeah. He is a good host. He's born to host. So, you know, actually, I think he was, stands to reason, he was better in this, I think. Because my memories of him in Price is Right is that he's just the oldest man. Like it feels like he always had that little wand microphone, you know, that was like the thin long one, and it just felt like his whole arm was going to break off because he's so old and stiff. And then we looked him up because it's so hard to remember which celebrities are alive and which ones are dead. He's still alive, 96, still good to go. Bob Barker. Man, speaking of that though, of celebrity deaths, apparently that's a thing with specifically the example I heard was Rue McClanahan from Golden Girls. Mm-hmm. She died some time ago, but on the anniversary of her death every year, you know, people will post about it online, and there's always a big wave of people who didn't catch the previous year's announcement, so they think she just died. So they're like, oh, what a shame. Oh, Rue McClanahan. And it's like, no, it's the anniversary. She died 10 years ago or whatever. But yeah, it's like, who can keep track of all these dead celebrities, you know? There's so many of them.
And, well, any of them that were around in the 50s certainly would be getting long in the tooth if they're still alive.
Yeah.
kudos.
Yeah. Yeah, once you hit that like 90s period, you know, it's like, wow, you can't complain. You had a good run. Well, like I always say that with Granny McNally. It was like 102. It's
104.
like 104. Good Lord. So yeah, it's like, wow, it's a shame. It's always sad when someone dies, but it's like, wow, though. And she was pretty sharp right up to the end.
Pretty
like
good until about
103 and a half.
yeah. Well, I'll say 100 for sure.
Yeah.
And then even 101, she was not too bad. But then she was getting a little shaky there in the last couple of years. But
yeah, like you literally can't ask for more than that. That's nuts. I always was kind of curious because like I never did anything with it, but I did do like a little interview with her when she was in her 90s, and I've got the audio somewhere. I just, I don't know. It's just weird now. It's like I got an interview I did with my dead grandma, but someday I'll put it out or something. But one question I kind of wanted to ask her, but it was just too morbid, is, her husband died when I was a kid. I don't even remember him. It's same with your dad. Like both of my grandfathers died very young. So I was curious if the grandmothers, at a certain point when it's been decades, it's like, do you even like remember that guy that well anymore? Like that's what I think of, because like it's hard, even people that I know that I haven't seen in like 10 years, sometimes it's a little hard to conjure their face. So if you haven't seen your husband in 40 or 50 years, it's like, wow, it must be hard to remember that guy. But I didn't want to ask that because, like, what a weird question.
Yeah. Of course, she would say, of course she remembered.
Yeah. So, anyway. Isn't it funny, though? It's all relative. Like, I'm getting up there. I'm in my 40s now. You're in your 70s? Is that right?
Just turned 70.
Yeah. And, I guess depending on how you look at it, it's like, yeah, I guess I'm getting a little old, and I guess you're getting a little old. But hey, Bob Barker's 96. Like, we might still have a long ways to go. Or we could die tomorrow. Who the fuck knows?
What happens is a lot of time seems to go really fast the older you get. So I'm sure when your grandmother at 104 died, when she would think back to her husband who died when he was 73, I think. So, she had about 30 years in there without him. But it probably didn't seem like 30 years. It probably just seemed like a couple of years or 5 years or maybe 10 years.
Yeah, it is definitely all time definitely feels relative like that. It's weird too when I think about like, so you were around for the dawn of TV and I was around for the dawn of the internet and cell phones. But when you go back to like Granny McNally, she was around for the dawn of fucking electric lights and automobiles. Like that's insane to try to think about. Like, or my friend Ken, he talked about his grandmother. And so again, it's just a guy that I know, and he's talking about his grandma. It doesn't feel that old, but that was literally the Victorian age she was from. And
Sure, she was.
Yeah, it's like we're not that far removed from all that stuff.
No, and like you take your grandmother, McNally, was born in, was it 1910? I think it was 1910, because I know she was older than my mom.
So yeah, that's like the very end of the Old West was still around.
So they would have been. She lived in Montreal when she was like in the 1920s. They would have had electric lights and tram cars and probably the beginning of the automobile. But then when she moved to the country in the 1930s, I mean, they would have had no power.
No.
There might have been the occasional house that had power, but probably not. They probably only started getting electricity in the late 30s and the 40s. And so they would have had just gas lights and... I don't know.
It's weird because, like, you figure it's got to stop at some point, but maybe not. Like, the kids now will be like, yeah, I was around for the dawn of intelligent androids that did all of our manual labor. Like, what's going to happen next? Something crazy is going to happen. Yeah, just the march of progress. Or it'll become a horrible dystopia, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember when I was a kid, and you could go outdoors, and everyone didn't have the super flu. So who knows? Maybe it'll go that way. Hopefully not. But anyway, there we go. First game show, Truth or Consequences. So, again, we're just adding to our docket of useless pop cultural information, but...
Well, I'm not a game show host now. I never was. And when I look back at this...
A game show fan, you mean, not host.
Yeah.
You're definitely not a host.
Yeah, fan. But I can't see that this would have enticed me to become a person that would have watched that every day.
Right.
But I'm sure there were people that did.
It actually kind of reminds me, too, of just having people do these weird, splashing around in a pool and getting all wet, or kicking a rock and maybe hurting yourself or whatever, is it reminds me of a super slow molasses version of Japanese game shows, because Japanese game shows are all about like, do something crazy and dangerous and maybe we'll give you a prize. And like, yeah, it's sort of neat to see they mentioned too, they were running down the history of our show, here's all the great stuff that we did, and one of them was we sent a university student onto a deserted island for 10 weeks.
10 months. Did it say 10 weeks or 10 months?
I think it was just 10 weeks, but still, it's like...
That's long enough.
Yeah, and that's interesting because like now we have Survivor, which has been running for ages, 15 years or so. And, but yeah, it's like they did Survivor in the 40s or whatever. Or the 50s or whenever. It's like, yeah, kind of no new ideas, really. They were doing it all back then. So cheers to Bob Barker, I guess. Keep on keeping on, pal. He'll outlive us all.